Good evening. I'm Greer and Shannan, President of Seahorse Victoria, and with me tonight is a very special guest, my daughter Shannan. Shannan, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me here. It's been a long time coming.
It has been. One of the things that I thought in talking about tonight is clearly the time that I outed myself to you and what sort of reaction you had and the way you viewed how you saw your dad.
Well, I was already about 26 by then, I think, and I had a child of my own, and I had just come to visit, or I don't know, you were living in the middle of nowhere and I popped in to visit you there. But I knew when Mum and I had separated, and I guess we're going through a divorce. The timeline's a bit hazy for me now, all these years later. I remember it as you revealing to me, or about to reveal to me, why you separated. And I was always like curious, but always just thought, you grew up hard, or you've changed your mind, or the kids have grown up now, and you're like, yeah, people do that. So you were revealing to me slowly. It felt like it went forever, these few minutes where you were about to tell me what it was that contributed to your separation. And I remember running through my head thinking, what could it be? Like, what's he done? Like, what? And I didn't expect you to come out and say, well, it's because I'm a cross-dresser, or I identify as a cross-dresser at the time. That surprised me. That meant I hadn't thought of that. That wasn't one of the things that I thought would come up. So I probably processed, you go through something instantly in those minutes, but then the hours and then the days and weeks over time, and it would have varied depending on my mood. But initially I sort of thought, okay, well, that explains, I remember thinking, that explains the lipstick in your car and the little things, like, why you had a flowers toiletry with, flowers all over it or something, and toiletries back. I also rationalised that, well, I was a teen, and when I was a teen, I wore a lot of men's clothes or shaved my hair when I was in my early 20s, and wore unusual clothes that were maybe eccentric. So I saw it as an eccentricity, if anything. Yeah. Then I probably went through a few days later of worrying or fussing that it was a bit weird, or like, does that mean you're going to be dressed like that every time I go out? And how would, because people get embarrassed about things. Would I be embarrassed about that or not? So I would have gone through all sorts of stuff. But then, of course, I was just living my life, raising a daughter, single mum, and I was interstate most of the time as an adult. So I wasn't around you, so...
Obviously, it's quite a surprise. And as you've just been explaining, lots of different thoughts and emotions rattling through the brain, and it was the last thing that you would have ever thought of.
It hadn't occurred to me.
So if we step back to when you mentioned about being a teenager and wearing the variety of clothes that you did used to turn up with, and
he's laughing because it was things like pyjamas downtown, and I think rosary beads from my ear to my nose.
That's
and things
right.
Like that.
So you sort of challenged
the norm.
The norm, as it were. You were very independent in that sense. What do you think was the catalyst for you to being sort of that challenging, independent sort of person?
I don't know, because we had a pretty suburban, normal life, went to good Catholic schools and things, easy to conform, and you do anyway to a degree, but I'm a creative soul, so there's that. You and Mum never, like in general towards other people, I never saw any discrimination, or you weren't racist, you weren't like, turning your nose down at other people as they walk past, or making comments, or as I've known other people over time, they sort of behave like that. Oh, look what they're wearing, what are they doing? You're not those kind of people. So I guess it was easier to be myself because there was no judgment coming at me anyway. And you experiment when you're younger, and you do it probably through your whole life a bit.
That was one of the things that I know your mum and myself sort of thought about, particularly with your older brother in his early teens, was the thing that we really wanted you to be was basically just independent, responsible adults. And you know,
Don't know about the responsible, but we've got the independent down pat. Like, hey, you've got 4 kids though. I think one of us is doing really well. Go Owen, good job.
well, I think
we're all doing good.
I think the independence is really accepting responsibility for the things that you do. You know, it's not. You know, it's not us to come and sweep up your mess. We tried to be there for you with the difficult times and the good times, but ultimately you've got to make the decisions yourself, and then we have to sort of live with that decision. You know, obviously, you know, you chuffed off to interstate, and I think there was one point you were living in a teepee in northern Queensland.
Yeah, with a crawling baby. Nothing like getting a baby to crawl real quick by putting them on some twigs. Yeah, because I had this natural desire to go natural. I just thought, what's the point of life? It must be to be as natural as possible. And I still connect by doing things like wear green and stuff, but it's not quite right. But I was always exploring. I didn't belong. I didn't belong in suburbia. I knew that. I always thought one day I'm going to move out. I don't know where I'm going to go, but I tend to go where there's hills and trees.
Yeah. Well, you sort of mentioned there about sort of the very suburban life, you know, and nothing really untoward or out of, you know, the character with what you knew us. And I think, you know, that was one of the things I was always involved in was service clubs like Apex and Rotary. And when it came to the sporting clubs or the scout clubs, somebody, you know, we need a president. Oh, silly me, I put my hand up.
Your hand's always up there.
A lot of that with me was, one, besides wanting to sort of do something that allowed each of you to be involved in whatever you wanted to be, was also a way of coping with lots of other things, you know, that doubts you have about yourself sometimes about, am I good enough to do things? So, well, one of the best things to do is participate and get involved and challenge yourself, and you say, well, you know, I'm not really a natural leader, but I'll step out and put my hand up because that's going to have some benefits besides for me, for my family. In your teenage years, we had a business. All the franchisees got together one day. The franchise agreement allowed for a development of a franchisee committee. We're all staring at each other wondering, well, how's this all going to work? And we're looking around each other. And I thought, oh, something I'm used to is putting my hand up and taking on the role. Highlighted some of the things that we'd been trying to pass on to the 4 of you was about having integrity and taking responsibility for the things that you do, even though that you've had the radical challenges. Would you see any of that in yourself and the others?
Oh, you were Mr. Responsible and, you know, could do the right thing, and I guess that there was an element of that. I assume it came from nurture, not nature, but maybe there's a bit of that in it. At the core of it, I want to be true to myself, as natural as possible. If that, whatever you want to call it, the universe has provided me with my skill set, my personality, my whatever, whoever this is, whoever I am. So I'm trying to make sense of that and fit it in the world, and the best I can do is be true to it, and I guess that comes with integrity. When it comes to raising my daughter, I just muddled my way through that one. So,
I think a lot of us do.
Do we? Yeah. Some people make it look so organised and normal, and I'm like, how did you do that? So, but she had a lot of health issues, so with a lifelong illness, and she'll have that for her whole life. And you know, you find yourself doing things like, I believe it or not, I actually spent a bit of time defending her to educationalists. You know, you have to go to school, you have to turn up at a certain time. Too bad if you're sick and you've been sick all night long and you can't get there at 9 a.m. She's always late, so you've got to make excuses or explain why at least. And missing school or hospitalised for weeks at a time, and then you've got to catch up. So there's alternative learning plans and people are asking, what's going on. And I remember having to defend her and say, well, this is her life and I'd rather her alive than educated right now, and we'll stay her alive and then we'll get her educated later, so back off, I had to get it's a bit feisty here and there to fight for what I thought was important.
You took on a role of creative, being on community radio for a long time. So how did you find doing that? It allowed you to provide the guidance for your daughter.
Who's now given him a great-granddaughter.
Yes. So
I'm a grandma now.
Yeah, we're all very proud of that. And mixing with a lot of different people of variety of backgrounds, because that's what being involved in radio, you're needing to. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, that was a great experience, being involved in the community, and everybody feels better when they're contributing to their community. And for a creative soul to contribute creatively, that's even better. So that was, I was in a new town looking for a new job, looking in the newspaper for opportunities, no jobs around, thought maybe volunteer for something, and then saw an ad for volunteer at the local radio station, and I thought, there's no way I'm going on air, but I'll do something behind the scenes, that will be fine. Oh, I forget his name now. I feel like I want to say Peter or something like that, but it was Patsy Biscoe. Do you remember Patsy Biscoe from ABC? She used to sing kids songs and things. Yes. It was her brother. Anyway, he was working there, and he answered the phone when I rang, and he popped in to see me on the way home, because he lived around the corner, and he said, oh, good, yeah, you can go on air. And I was like, no, I don't want to go on air. But then I did some training, and I met a lady who was the program manager, and she said, so you're going on air next Wednesday at 12. And I just kind of went, what? No way. So I just did it. It was Wednesday at midday, 12 till 3 for 10 years or something. I did that. It was my little show called A Little Left of Centre. Yeah,
the last 3 or 4 years that you were involved with the radio, that I finally did out myself to you. It was in that period of time frame. So how do you think then suddenly, having a different perspective of your dad change the way you started doing things from that point on?
I'm not sure it did. I can't think of a time where I was like, because of that, this, cause and effect. Because I was living interstate, and because I was really busy with a child going through school and sick as well, and I did get a bit of work as well. So I just was distracted with life for a long time. I probably didn't give it a lot of thought most of the time. Maybe when I did meet other people along the way, I'd be less confused about it, or less feel like it was more foreign. I'm saying that backwards. I think meeting different types of people got easier over time. But the whole of the world started to change. There started to be a real shift. My daughter came out when she was 12, and we were sitting with a group of people, and older people, and they were asking, oh, how old are you now? 12? Oh, 12, you got a boyfriend? Stuff like that. And she'd just turn to them and go, I'm a lesbian. I was like, oh, okay. So my 12-year-old is telling me she's a lesbian. My dad's saying that he likes to dress as a woman. And then, time goes by, you're busy, and next thing you know, you look around and the whole world is talking about trans, and it's just happened naturally that we've come to another point where there's a spectrum of different ways to see oneself. So then words like queer came out, and I hadn't heard that terminology before, but in my daughter's world, this has become normal. It has evolved that now we've got terminology that we didn't have when you came out, is all I mean. So, and that's beyond you, that you didn't do that. It was just the world was doing that at the same time. Maybe that was part of why you felt comfortable to come forward, is that the world was shifting a little bit more, becoming a bit more accepting, or you didn't feel afraid? What made you think I'm ready to do this and I'm going to live this way now?
Yeah, and that's always a big question with when trying to work out what it is in your life, because there's aspects of it. I can think right back to when I was a toddler, and even though I love my athletics and running around, there was something in the background that said, no, there are times that I'd like to identify as female, but clearly being 6 foot tall and very fit and athletic, that doesn't provide that sort of visual look. And I think there's also, as you get older, I think particularly nudging up around that 50 plus mark, that you sort of start to think, well, time's running out. I need to actually do something about it. And
live your more authentic self in the time that you're living, that kind of thing.
But in the early days, your mum sort of was trying to get me to go and deal with it, and if there is a regret, it's sort of not following that advice, and she became the keeper of the secret, and I think that's really the big regret, and because that meant that, while I was sort of focused on myself, I'd taken my focus away from her as well, and that sort of has an impact in relationships, and that's really I suppose the struggle. The longer it goes on, it does put bridges and gaps in relationships, but I think by and large, we still get on reasonably well.
And I guess to simplify it, I think Mum just, it wasn't in her plan to marry a woman. She was married to a man, so when it came to you deciding, she was like, well, I want to be married to a man. So was that something, is that oversimplified?
It's along that line, yes.
Okay.
I
so
think
you had to choose between the marriage and be yourself. Is that a decision you felt like you had to make?
Well, it is, because it's sort of something that was never going to go away. As much as in those earlier days, you'd sort of go, I'm going to overcome this, and it just doesn't go away. You might push it into the back of your mind and background for a few years, but it crops up. And so it needed to be dealt with openly. And
so you did, you spoke to each of us individually. We've got 4 children, you spoke to it individually. And I kind of want to address the fact that I keep saying he, because there's going to be people who watch your show who are like, but that's Greer, you're supposed to say she. But I've always, for 26 years at least, and even beyond that, because initially you were just identifying as a cross-dresser. That's how you worded it to me at the time. I'm still stuck in he, but in our family too, your grandpa, to my daughter and my nephews and nieces, and or niece. Got one special niece, and everyone else is a nephew. So you live this sort of almost double life, dual life. It's more fluid. Like you still got your long hair, you still sit there just like you are now, but you just wear your normal, shirt and pants, and the same stuff I think you had back in the 80s. I think you still got the same clothes.
with the fluidity of where I'm at is because I needed work, I had to make a conscious decision about, well, do I go and transition fully, or part of needing work, and the only work I can get as an older person is physical work, that if I'd taken hormones that it would impact on my physical strength and therefore my ability to have work. So it was a very conscious choice. But what I also did was decided, well, I've got to have a life, and the family is still important, as well as developing this side of my life. So I sort of worked out a way that it just worked and flowed into a natural sequence of things. So you know.
So it's done out as on your days off and after work when you're at home.
Yeah.
So Greer's got a rule, if you come to my house, I am as I am.
Yes.
But when they come to our house, it's usually with respect to the grandkids and Mary more than anything.
Yeah, that's right. And it sort of just works and blends. You know, I can still talk about the things I do, but most people talk about the things they do. They don't talk about what they actually wear when they're doing those things, unless it's specifically relevant to the conversation. So even when I was at work, I talked about all my Toastmaster stuff and going out with friends. And that they didn't need to know that I wore a dress or wore makeup because it was irrelevant to the actual subject matter of this is what I do. Every fortnight I go along to a Toastmaster meeting, I'm judging at competition and things like that. And the same even within the family. I don't need to say, well, I'm wearing this particular coloured nail polish or 4-inch heels this week and 1-inch heels the next week, because it's not relevant to what you're doing. It's kept my sanity, I know that, because I haven't isolated myself from it, and fortunately I don't feel isolated from the family, and that's the other thing too.
That's good. I was going to ask you about that because I know initially the kids were still little, the grandkids, and there were wives and things involved, and so everybody needed a minute to sort of figure it out, but I think we're getting more and more comfortable with it, and I think just the way the world's going, people are, but I was saying this to you the other day, I still have reservations about people calling themselves an opposite gender to the one they are, and I know that there's all nuance around it and everybody's got their opinion about it or whatever, but I wish more and more people would feel comfortable in their physical self and not feel like they have to take surgical moves. And I'm kind of glad you didn't go through that, because I would hate for anything to go wrong and then you have to live with that as well. But it was just timing. Maybe if you were younger, you would have. I don't know. But
well, that'll be a question that can never be answered because time has passed. But what I've tried to do is just be the person that I felt I was all along, except now that I'm more open about myself, hopefully I'm seen as a better person.
Oh, you're asking me? Are you a better person because you wear a dress?
Not necessarily because I wear a dress, because I'm not hiding anything.
Maybe I didn't know it as you hiding yourself back then. From my perspective, what happened also is we transitioned from a child-parent relationship to a sort of an adult relationship where our relationship was always going to change. And once upon a time you were the boss of me, and you're not the boss of me anymore. So that dynamic has changed, so we're more like equal partners in a conversation, so I can easily accept you if you accept me, and you do. So that works out really well.
Shannan, I think on that nice uplifting note, I'd like to thank you for joining me in this conversation tonight. Thank you for watching Bent TV tonight. I'm Greer McGearey, and with me tonight has been my very special guest, my daughter Shannan.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching.